And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
And welcome, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. You have entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo. And I am Gary Michuta, your host and sensei for this hour. Welcome aboard, everybody, to the program where we sharpen our intellects and our spiritual life so that we can share the faith with clarity, charity, and confidence and help others better know and love our Lord. And got some great stuff in store for you for this broadcast. We're going to talk about Journey of Faith for a man who has opened up a remarkable podcast ministry and also has a remarkable story to share. His name is Eric Robinson. He's new to the show, and he's going to share his story about his journey from evangelicalism into the Catholic Church, and that's going to be coming up on the other side of the break. In the meantime, as always, we do our critical thinking skills. Every episode, we look at an informal fallacy. So today's Finding the Fallacy is called the Pooh Fallacy. Yes, folks, that is what it's called. Usually it's some sort of Latin name, but yeah, we're going to talk about the Pooh Fallacy. We also meet an early church father every program. And today's early church father is an interesting early church father in that it's not one individual, but it's actually the Council of Elvira. So lots of great stuff in store for us today. And lest I forget, I want to give my shout-outs to all of you watching live stream on Facebook and YouTube. Hello, everybody. Welcome aboard. Great to see familiar names out there. Thank you for the emoji explosion as well. And I'd also like to welcome on board all of you listening via radio and podcast around the world. We truly appreciate you joining us for the program and, having our daily workouts, as it were, for Christ. So good stuff all around. By the way, I should mention this. If you have any questions for our guest, Eric Robinson, please give us a call toll free at 888-526-2151. That's 888-526-2151. And or perhaps you're too shy to come to the mic, but you have a question that you'd like to throw out from me, or maybe you want to share a situation that you're in, please email us at the Dojo mailbox, which is questions@handsonapologetics.com. Yes, your emails do fly through the internet into the Dojo mailbox, and I do respond to each email I get. So it's great to hear from you, and also just great to be part of this community that we call Hands-On Apologetics. Without further ado, though, why don't we jump into our exercises for today? Today's Finding the Fallacy, like I mentioned, is the Pooh Fallacy. I wonder what that would be in Latin, if that's even possible to put in Latin. What is it? Well, it's the informal logic that consists in dismissing an argument as unworthy of serious consideration. Scholars generally characterize the fallacy as a rhetorical device in which a speaker ridicules an argument without responding to the substance of the argument. In other words, it's a form of an ad hominem attack, where in an ad hominem attack, you attack the messenger and not the message. With the Pooh fallacy, you attack the message in general, but not its substance. So this is a very common fallacy, especially when you're talking to non-believers, because basically what it does is they try to characterize the arguments for God, for Christ, for His church, as really being sub-rational and not worthy of any serious consideration. And therefore they kind of brush aside all the substantive arguments you may give and just say it's not worthy of even looking at. And how do you do that? Well, you have to hold their feet to the fire. And usually what I do is I throw a counter challenge where I say, look, if it really is this ridiculous, then it should be very easy to refute. But you can't make a straw man. You can't misrepresent the arguments let's talk about what the arguments are, and who knows, maybe you can show me where I'm wrong. I mean, if it's that ridiculous, it should be a piece of cake, right? And so you might be able to bait them into actually giving into a substantive dialogue over things. But yeah, this is something that I think our culture's really caught up in. That if they can show something to be ridiculous, or if they can ridicule something, then they'll say that it's ridiculous and not worthy of consideration. But really, anybody can ridicule anything. It doesn't matter whether or not that thing is true. So that's our finding of the fallacy for today, the Pooh fallacy. And let's move on to meet the early church fathers, shall we? Like I said, it's not an individual father today. Today it's actually council. It's a Council of Elvira. And, of course, it met in the city of Elvira, which is a site near the present city of Granada in Spain. 19 bishops, including the celebrated Osius of Cordova, were present, along with 26 priests and deacons. The council is an interesting council in that its nature was that of reform, and it was made up of 81 canons that reflect early legislation that came from Africa. Numerous dates have been assigned for this council, the extremes being as early as 250 A.D., the other extreme being as late as 700 A.D. Neither of these dates, by the way, are taken seriously. This is according to Jurgen's Faith of the Early Church Fathers. Other dates which have been proposed, they basically range everywhere in between 300, 306, 313, 314, 325. The opinion today is divided. It's narrowed it down basically to about 300 AD to 306 AD. So that's probably the sweet spot if you want to date when exactly this council took place. And as we mentioned before, it is a council that took place in Spain. In fact, as far as we know, it's the first council to be held in Spain, and it was attended by all parts of the peninsula. And like I said, we have these 81 canons that they promulgated. They're all disciplinary canons. They didn't touch on doctrine. However, they do throw much light on the religious and ecclesiastical life of Spanish Christians at the eve of the triumph of Christianity. So these canons deal with everything from marriage to baptism to idolatry, fasting, excommunication, regulations concerning cemeteries, usury, vigils, frequency of Mass, relations with Christians and Jews, Christians and pagans, Christians and heretics. Just basically, they surround all aspects of the life of the church in Spain in the beginning of the 4th century. There are a few canons that are worthy of note. For example, Canon 33, we have the oldest positive ecclesiastical ordinance concerning the celibacy of the clergy. In Canon 13 exhibits an institution of nuns that have long been familiar in Spain. So it actually gives some regulations as for females who have taken religious vows, what they can and can't do, what infractions, if they infraction on their vow, what kind of discipline ought to be meted out. In Canon 36, this is an unusual canon because it urges against the veneration of images as practiced in the Catholic Church. Now, scholars are a little bit divided as to why and where and how, this canon was meant to be implemented. Bintrim, De Rossi, and Heffel interpret the prohibition as directed against the use of images in the underground churches only, lest the pagans should caricature sacred scenes and ideas. In other words, one of the motivations for this may be that if the veneration of images was allowed to be widespread, pagans would start adopting Christian images and used for profane purposes. At least those scholars believe so. Another group of scholars opine that the council did not pronounce as to the licety or non-licety of the use of images, but it was an administrative measure simply forbade them, lest new and weak converts from paganism should incur thereby any danger of relapse into idolatry, or by scandalized by certain superstitious excesses that in no way are approved by ecclesiastical authority. So that's basically the two groups in which scholars are divided on that particular canon. I think both of them certainly make sense, and they both would be disciplinary. They're not doctrinal. So, like I said, it wasn't that this canon said that it's illicit to use images or have images in places of worship, or even to venerate images, but rather it was like whether or not the practice should be prudent at this particular time and circumstance. Because remember, this, if the date's correct, we're talking about 300 AD, 306 AD. Paganism is the majority, and Christianity is just starting to emerge out of paganism. And so you would expect that there would have to be some sort of disciplinary measures to make sure that Christian worship, Christian use of images maintains its integrity, right? Because you don't want new Christians to, kind of not understand the proper use of images and fall into idolatry. Or on the other hand, you wouldn't want pagans to start adopting Christian images, and which would also be problematic as well, because it would be blasphemy or profanity, right? So that is our Meet the Early Church Father for today, the Council of Elvira, which met roughly around AD 300. Coming up on the other side of the break, we're going to talk with Eric Robinson about Polycarp's paradigm and also his journey of faith. Well, I almost couldn't say that. Stay tuned, folks.
This is Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio. This March, VMPR, in association with the Catholic Resource Center, will be hosting a special conference for the Adoramus Society. Adoramus at the Triduum, a conference on the spirituality of the Triduum liturgies, featuring speakers Father Joseph Fessio, Dr. Anthony Lillis, and Christopher Karstens, addressing such topics as developing a liturgical spirituality, the spirituality of Holy Thursday, the spirituality of Good Friday, and the spirituality of the Paschal Vigil and Easter season. It all takes place March 14, 2020, at the historic Sacred Heart Chapel at 381 West Center Street, Covina, California, 91723. You can register online at vmpr.org or call now at 877-526-2151 to reserve your seat today for Adoramus at the Triduum. Hebrews 11:3 says, "By faith we come to understand." According to St. Augustine, understanding is the reward of faith. Therefore, seek not to understand that you may believe, but believe that you may understand. May God grant us a strong living faith in Him and His divine plan of salvation, and help us to believe so that we may understand.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody, Hands-On Apologetics. And what would induce an evangelical who is totally sold out for the Lord to ever consider to become Catholic. Well, our guest is going to share his journey of just that. His name is Eric Robinson. And I'm not going to give a lot of biographical detail. I'll just say that he runs a podcast ministry. It's called Polycarp's Paradigm. I don't know why.
There you go.
I no problem up till that point, and then just my lips locked. So, Polycarp's Paradigm, and Eric Robinson, welcome to Hands on Apologetics.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I've been going through your podcast, and man, talk about an enthusiasm and just a person who is sold out for the Lord. It's great to see those two things welded together and to promote the historic faith. So well done. Yeah, well done.
Thank you.
History.
Yeah, it's funny that you, the name is kind of weird, I'll admit. So I carry business cards and I have stickers so that people, when I introduce my podcast, Polycarp's Paradigm, I'm like, don't worry, the name's weird, but here's a card. So you'll be able to find it.
No, that's great, especially listeners to this program. You guys know who Polycarp was because, every episode we do the Meet the Early Church Fathers. So, so let's talk about your journey of faith.
Yes.
Now, I believe, did you grow up in a Christian home or?
Yep. So basically, I grew up in an evangelical Protestant home. My mom actually grew up as a Christian Scientist, and my dad grew up as a nominal Methodist. But then I have two older sisters, and when my oldest sister was born, they were like, hey, we need to get serious about religion. And so that's when they really started exploring the Christian faith, and they joined a Bible church and got got plugged in there. And so by the time I was born, they were already on fire for their faith as Christians, and then we all got baptized together in a Presbyterian church, actually, when I was in first grade. Like my two older sisters, my parents, and myself, we all got baptized together, and that was a really, really cool moment there.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so as a whole family. Yeah, in fact, I just finished your interview with your mother on Christian Science. And
yes.
I was a little confused about, where exactly, how everything fit together. So, okay, so you as a family, you were baptized into Presbyterian Church. What was that like? What was your experience?
Yeah, so I was born in Texas and lived here for about 4 years, then moved to Michigan, lived there for about 7 years. And so that Presbyterian church was in Michigan, and that was when I was in kindergarten and first grade. And so I don't remember much about that church. My parents always say that was like one of their most favorite churches. It combined a lot of tradition with some contemporary things. So they really liked it. And then in elementary school, I went to a Christian school. There was like a Protestant evangelical Christian school. We were part of an E-free church. But it's really hard to remember all the way back then. What I can say about my elementary years, which you probably heard this when I told my story, is that I was a little insecure about my faith. And so I would just pray to receive Jesus into my heart every chance I got, just to make sure I had that relationship with God. And that's something that I really do value from my evangelical background, is that emphasis on a personal relationship with Christ. And that's something that I carry with me even to this day there. So,
so what a work of grace that that you would do that just keep committing yourself to Jesus every chance you get.
Yeah, and for me, so church was, we moved back to Texas when I was in about sixth grade. And before that happened, I actually went to a summer camp. And summer camp to me was the biggest impact on my spiritual life growing up. I saw a skit of the crucifixion when I was in fifth grade at the summer camp. And that's really when, for me, I really wanted it not just to be my parents' faith, but my own faith. And so really from an early age, I really wanted to pursue Christ. And when we moved back to Texas, we became part of this more mega church, non-denominational church. It was just massive. But every summer I would go back to camp, and that's really where I received more of my spiritual formation, emphasis on reading scripture, emphasis on accountability, and that relationship with Christ once again. So that's what I really feel like was the biggest influence on me growing up.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, was it just the setting that did it, or obviously it's God's grace, but you kind of, Christ is kind of bringing you along all the way through this. And was that a particular, what was it that made that different than any other, point in your life?
Yeah, well, especially just seeing the skit of the crucifixion of Christ just made it come alive in a whole new way. It was like, wow, he did that for me. This is real. And okay, like I have a choice now. I can either give him my whole life in return, or I can just be nominal or, lukewarm, or just walk away. Right. And it was like seeing him suffer for me in that way. That just made me want to follow him. And then it was very helpful, like especially in middle school and then really in high school, I got really great Christian friends around me. And to this day, I'm best friends with them. They're still Protestant, but we are still best friends. And so we were able to journey on that same page together for a number of years in high school. And that just confirms it. You can't just come off these camp highs, and it's easy to come off camp highs and then go back down. But the key is to have friendships that can sustain you on your own friendship with Christ. And so that was a huge thing for me. And so going into college, that was a huge emphasis for me, is to find Christian community that I could further deepen my relationship with Christ with.
Yeah, that's actually a very mature Christian attitude too. To kind of set your life path in a certain way so that you won't go off the rails. Be surrounded by good friends, go to a good college. Now, I love the story you have about picking a college. Do you want to share that with us, or?
Sure.
Yeah.
First of all, your listeners must know that I absolutely love robes. I'm obsessed with wearing robes. I'm not in a robe right now. I actually dressed up for this. But so when I was revealing to my family and my friends which college I was going to go to, first of all, the way I discerned that was a really cool thing. This is really the first time I really felt God's presence and heard God's voice. So really, everyone in my family was thinking I was going to go to the Air Force Academy. I was between the Air Force Academy, Baylor, and the University of Texas at Austin. And I had just finished visiting UT the previous week and it was my senior year, spring semester. It was like January of that year. And I was just praying to God, like, Lord, please reveal to me where you want me to go. And I saw UT, like that phrase flash before my mind's eye. And then a presence come over me. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll go there. And so like literally the next day or the next week, I don't remember exactly, I put on my robe and I had my UT shirt on my person, but then I had Baylor and Air Force Academy stuffed into my robe, and I threw out the Air Force Academy. I'm not going there. I threw out Baylor. I'm not going there. And then I took off my robe and I'm going to UT, and so that was a very climactic moment, and it was awesome. Like I definitely see the Lord's hand in it now, looking back, that is indeed where I was supposed to go. And what a cool thing though to feel God's presence and His purpose there at that time. And so yeah, that was just fantastic.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question: did you wear the robes to classes?
Not to classes, but I actually did wear one of them to a UT football game one time. So
there you go. Yeah, I have a brother, I think a couple of times did that at U of M. So
well, all right.
The weird thing is you probably fit in there,
Yes.
That's one of those schools. So okay, so you're now is the school explicitly Christian, or it's a secular school?
Oh no, the University of Texas at Austin is a public school, and it's actually one of the biggest party schools ever. But the cool thing is when you go to a really large school like that, it's like 50,000 students. You just have to find a group of friends that are on the same page. And what I love about UT is that the Christians that are there, at least when I was there, were really on fire for Christ, because you kind of have to be. If you don't, you will fall to the wayside. And so I joined a Christian fraternity called Brothers Under Christ, Bucks. And I joined a church at the time called the Austin Stone Community Church, which is a Reformed Baptist church, and became a small group leader there and all of that. But plugging into those communities was really important for me to maintain my Christianity and my life with Christ amidst a very dark university, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was thinking when I was listening to your story is, that's, I was just curious if you knew of groups or something that, the campus has this great ministry you need to plug in or something like that.
Yep. And like 80% of the guys in the fraternity in Bucks went to the Austin Stone. So it was kind of a natural thing where we all went to the church together. But interestingly enough, it was an interdenominational Christian group. So we actually had two guys, I remember, that were Catholic. And this is the first moment. And mind you, I have been a Christian. I was baptized in first grade. So really since first grade, been a Christian. And now I'm in college. And the first time I ever heard the word Eucharist was in college. And that blows my mind that the source and summit of the Christian faith, I didn't even know about it until I was in college. And even then it didn't click until I had my own journey towards Catholicism and started really looking into it. It just didn't click for me. So I really don't even count that as my first time hearing it. I mean, technically that was, but really I didn't even learn about this stuff till about 6 years ago. And right now I'm 31. So it's crazy that I can grow up Christian my whole life without knowing what sacraments are, what the Eucharist is. And it's just crazy to me. And that's why I'm so passionate about getting that message out there,
Yeah, no, I love that because, as Catholics, we tend to think, everyone pretty much believes the same thing we do. We believe, we kind of project our own beliefs on other people. But there are people out there that maybe never even heard of, the Eucharist or Christ's real presence or the sacraments. And you're Exhibit A, right?
Yeah. And once again, that's why I'm just so passionate about getting that out there. Because, I mean, yes, of course, we believed in communion, but it was symbolic, and we never called it the Eucharist or anything. Didn't really believe Jesus was actually present. My church, the mega church growing up, we did it like once or twice a year, maybe, and it was never during a Sunday service. It was always this like off service. So it was like, and now my whole spirituality revolves around the Eucharist. So it's just a huge paradigm shift, if you will.
Yeah, huge. But especially from your background, where sacraments aren't emphasized. In fact, when I hear the music coming up, we're coming up to a break. But I want to ask you about your reaction once you start hearing about the Eucharist. We're chatting with Eric Robinson about his journey of faith. We'll be right back right after this, folks. Stay tuned. Listening.
We finally did it. We have a Catholic Mental Health Conference on April 25th, 2020, here at the Sacred Heart Chapel with Dr. Louis Sandoval. He's going to be speaking on the basics of mental illness versus what we consider normal. Number one, he's going to go on the basics of mental illness versus what we consider normal. Second hour, depression, anxiety versus oppression and obsession. The third hour, bipolar disorders. Oh my gosh, infestation and possession. We're going to talk on mental health with the spiritual aspect. Number 4 talk will be on drug use, altered mental status versus demonic influence. I want to hear that talk. I hope you do too. Go to virginmostpowerfulradio.org or call us at 877-526-2151. The date is April 25th, 2020. Be there by calling 877-526-2151. God bless you. This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And here's an easy way to support us by going to smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center or Virgin Most Powerful Radio, And when you log in your Amazon account and you purchase products, a portion of it will go right back in supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And it doesn't cost you a dime. I want to thank you ahead of time because that supports us year-round. May God bless you and your family.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Eric Robinson about his journey of the faith. And Eric, right before the break, you mentioned that you were in college and you ran into Catholics who mentioned the Eucharist. What was your first impression of this thing called Eucharist?
Well, they gave me some CDs, and I listened to them, and I just didn't know what to think. So I just kind of tabled it, and it really didn't hit me until several years later when I was really journeying towards the Catholic Church. And by that point, some things had happened in my own life where I had become certainly more charismatic in my spirituality. So after I was part of that Austin Stone Community Church, I actually was part of a house church for a time where I started to experience some of the gifts of the Spirit and all of those things, like supernatural charisms, if you will. And I think that really is what opened me up later to be totally okay and cool with the Eucharist. Like, oh, okay, like that makes sense. Like I didn't have, like the Eucharist was not a big stumbling block. It was a super big attraction to me, to the Catholic Church. It's like, oh, that's Jesus. Okay, like, well, I love Jesus, so therefore I should probably come into the church. But it was a lot more complicated than that, actually. But opening myself up to more charismatic expressions of Christianity, even before Catholicism was right on my radar, let that not be a difficulty for me later on. But initially, I got into some arguments with those Catholic friends over more moral issues, like contraception and stuff like that I just didn't understand the Catholic perspective on. But then I was also just so focused on my own thing with like starting to go to house church and like the charismatic stuff that I put the Catholic thing on the back burner because I was just diving into that kind of headlong.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So what is a house church, by the way, for anyone out there that's not familiar with that?
Yeah, so basically it was just a small group of people gathering in a house to worship God together. And so for us in Austin, it looked like us praying together, us praying for each other. Sometimes we'd have someone say that they heard something from God or read a scripture. It was very informal. Basically the least traditional, least liturgical form of Christianity I could probably think of is what I was part of. So
yeah,
there you go.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't get more low church than a house church, right?
Right. And so, yeah, it's an interesting thing. And, we were all hungry for more of God. And it's cool to see like some of those people, I know some of them, leaning more towards a liturgical setting even after that. But
yeah,
it was an interesting experience to say the least. And some things happened to me in college where it was like, okay, I need to learn more about who this Holy Spirit is. And so I decided to do a discipleship training school in Waco at a charismatic Baptist church called Antioch Community Church. And that was a good experience, but it was after that moment I left Antioch and moved back home for a time where I started to reevaluate things. And I started to think like, okay, what is church like and why should I go? If church is all about just a sermon, well, I can podcast that. Or if it's about worship music, I can listen to that on my iTunes. Or if it's about Christian community even, like the house church. If it's about Christian community, well, I have Christian friends, and that's great. So why should I actually go? And same thing with the UT thing. Before my mind's eye flashed the word communion, and I was like, oh, that's weird. I don't really think about that very much. And so that happened in like 2012. And a year later, in 2013, is when I met my friend Ethan. And Ethan also had gone to that same charismatic Baptist church. We weren't friends at the time, but we became friends because he started working at the same company I was working for. And he was finishing up Protestant seminary and started reading the early church fathers. And I'll never forget, he said something very profound to me after we had been talking and becoming friends. Because my whole thing with joining house church and doing the discipleship training school, my whole heart was I want to be part of the early church. I want to be part of the church I see in the book of Acts with all those miracles and everything. You know, I want that. I want to be part of the early church. And Ethan said to me, Eric, I know your heart burns to be part of the early church, but I think I found it. It still exists. I was like, what? What does this mean? And he talked to me about apostolic succession. So then we were talking about Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism and like diving into those things. And then we quickly transitioned really to just diving deeper into the Catholic faith. And he said, Eric, you should read the Catechism of the Catholic Church. It's so amazing. And mind you, he's not even Catholic at this time. He's Anglican at this point. And so I started going to the Anglican church with him for a little bit. I never joined though. But I started reading the Catechism, and that was so huge for me. So I was reading the early fathers like Ignatius of Antioch. I was reading the Catechism, and I was having these conversations with my friend Ethan. And those were the three things really that drew me into the Catholic Church. Because the Catechism, I had a lot of misconceptions and prejudices against Catholics, against the Catholic Church. I didn't even know I had, but it cleared all of that up. And it was so beautiful. And so that's really what propelled me on that journey to the Catholic faith.
Yeah, that is, I think that's, one of those desires that's good and noble within Protestantism is the desire to be in that authentic church that's displayed in Acts. But the problem is, for some reason, it's like it doesn't occur that maybe that the church in Acts continued after Acts was completed, So did you even know about early church fathers before your friend, or?
No, I had no idea about any of them, really. I mean, I'd heard of later fathers like Augustine. I'd heard the name, but I had really I had almost no history. I just went from the Bible to the modern context, and that was it. And you see what Jesus taught, you do that, and like you don't worry about what's in between. But what's in between really matters, and it's so amazing. Like, one of my favorite things now as a Catholic is to learn the stories of the saints that have gone before us, and so inspiring, right? And it just makes my relationship with Christ way better and way more profound and way more familial. It's not just about the personal relationship with Christ, it's about that communal relationship with Christ. And it's amazing to me. One of the episodes I did on my podcast was Satan's Goal for Your Life is the title of it. And it just is amazing to me. I really think the goal is to keep people away from the Eucharist, to keep people away from devotion to Mary, because that devotion could put us in more union with God, which is his ultimate goal, is to disrupt our union with God. And so he wants to also tear away our prayer life. And so, my gosh, he put just a veil over my eyes to not even see these things. And that's why one of my goals is to unveil it, to shed light on this. So that people can know, like, no, this is what happened. And God is very providential. I think I became Catholic at exactly when he wanted me to, so that I could have this background in Scripture and these things that I would say are prelims to becoming Catholic, like the emphasis on the early church, the emphasis on personal relationship with Christ, that are really in the evangelical community. These are great pointers to have commonality and bring people more and more into full communion with the Catholic Church.
Yeah, absolutely. If you wouldn't mind going back to when you first started looking at the early church fathers, do you remember anything particular that jumps out? I mean, since you have Polycarp's paradigm, I imagine Polycarp is somewhere in the mix.
Yes. And Polycarp actually ended up becoming my patron saint, my confirmation saint. So I was confirmed under the name Polycarp. And so that was really cool. For him, I was just super motivated by his story. He was martyred at the age of 86. And really, since I was in third grade, I had this desire to be a martyr. I remember telling my mom that quote from Philippians by St. Paul, "For to me to live is Christ, to die is gain." And she was like, "Don't." And so I was like, "Mom, I want to die for Christ." And she was like, "Don't say that to me." And but that was a desire deep in my heart. And so when I knew when I was being confirmed, I wanted a martyr. And I chose him because of his example. And he's such a big link between Bible and tradition. And that's something that I really needed to see. And he was a disciple of the Apostle John and friends with St. Ignatius of Antioch. So his person and the link that he is profound to me. But as far as writings, the most profound writing for me was St. Ignatius of Antioch, who was martyred in around 107 AD. And, just to give it one example of a part of his writings that really just hit me was he talks about obedience to the bishop, and he says you need to submit to the bishop as if he's Jesus Christ in your midst. And I was like, well, wait, who is my bishop? I don't have a bishop. And then that led me on the trail of like, okay, what are bishops? I didn't know what bishops were. And then the presbyters, which the presbyterate are the priesthood, and the deacons. And so we have this church structure from early on. And I was like blown away with how important maintaining unity with the bishop was. And that was a huge thing. And of course, he highlights that the Eucharist really is the flesh and blood of Christ and does not shrink back from that. So that was a huge one for me. And then also St. Justin Martyr, the first depiction that we have of Christian worship in the early church is from his writings, where he's explaining to the emperor, hey, like, here's what we actually do, because he was combating some errors at the time. And that was so amazing to me to read him basically say what the Mass is today. We have liturgy of the Word, prayers of the faithful, then liturgy of the Eucharist. And that was awesome, because once again, my heart was to be part of the early church. And there you go. It's right there what they did. And I just didn't know.
Yeah. That probably was exhilarating and scary at the same time, I imagine, because it's exhilarating and you see those connections. But it must have been scary because that's so foreign from your experience of Christianity up to that point.
Right. And, I actually interviewed my dad as well. So spoiler alert, my parents became Catholic 2 years ago. I became Catholic 5 years ago. So that was a really cool thing for us. But in my dad's story, we talk about that tension, of realizing, wait, like, we're not partaking of the Eucharist, but that's really important to the early church. And so there is that tension there for sure.
Very good. Yeah, we're chatting with Eric Robinson about his journey of faith. More to come on the other side of the break, folks. Listen to Hands on Apologetics.
Welcome, Daniel. You're on the line. What's on your mind, brother?
Hi, I just wanted to share a testimony about Virgin Most Powerful Radio. I had a buddy at work who, he's a lukewarm Catholic guy, and I wanted him to start listening to the Terry and Jesse show, so I kept telling him to download the app, and he kept putting me off. So one day, I grabbed his phone and I downloaded the app for him. I went on vacation, and I kept telling him to listen to it. He would kind of put me off. I came back from vacation. He comes to my cubicle, and he says to me, hey, man, I've been listening to Terry and Jesse's show, and it's great. And it's made a big impact in his life. The guy, he's going to weekly adoration a couple times a week. He goes to the Mass in the morning. He's an on-fire Catholic, and he promotes the Terry and Jesse show in the Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
Daniel, what a testimony. And I want to encourage our listeners to get those cards by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org and do what Daniel's doing. Go out and spread the faith by inviting people to listen to Virgin Most Powerful. Daniel, thanks for your testimony, brother. God love you.
You're welcome.
Jesus said in Luke 17, "When you have done all that you were ordered to do, say, 'We are unprofitable servants. We have only done our duty.'" According to St. John of the Cross, God is pleased with the little deeds we do in secret. He takes more pleasure in these than in a multitude of grand works that we may do out of the desire to be seen by others. May God help us to do the things that please Him, and not just to appear great in the eyes of others.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody, to Hands-On Apologetics. And we were chatting with Eric Robinson of Polycarp's Paradigm and about his journey of faith. And so, Eric, about this point, was this when you started thinking about formally joining the Catholic Church, or was there still some development that needed to take place?
Yeah, so I started really diving into the early fathers and the catechism in the summer of 2013. And about a year later is when a little less than a year later, I decided to do RCIA. So I was working for a company at the time where I did a lot of interactions with Christian ministries, and some of those were Catholic churches. And so I was talking to a priest actually about my interest in the Catholic Church, and he was like, "Oh, well, you should do RCIA." And I was like, "What's that?" And he's like, "Oh, it's a rite of Christian initiation for adults." And I was like, "Okay, I'll check that out." And it's so funny. My prayer was pretty shallow, but I went to my local parish. I was living in Grapevine, Texas at the time, so that was at St. Francis of Assisi in Grapevine. And I was like, "All right, Lord," I was about to meet with the RCI director. I was like, "Lord, please let him be a cool guy. Like, if you really want me to become Catholic or something." Like, and he was so great. His name's Jared Zimmer. He now works for with Bishop Barron at Word on Fire, but he was the RCI director at the time. And since I didn't know any Catholics, he became my sponsor, which was nice.
Awesome.
But I joined RCIA about 50-50 as to whether or not I was going to become Catholic. And I actually put together an email list of not all of them, but a lot of spiritual mentors and leaders I had in my life. So all of them were Protestant. And I would update them each week during RCIA and say, "Hey, am I like off track here? Am I like going into heresy? Or like, here's what I'm learning. Like, please, like, let me know any red flags." And about 90 to 95% of them were like fully affirming, even though they themselves weren't yet interested in becoming Catholic. They were like, "Hey, this is interesting. Like, we didn't hear this before." And like, okay, well, that makes sense. And so that was really positive. For me, though, the biggest point of tension wasn't really the Eucharist, but it was, I still couldn't wrap my mind around the Blessed Virgin Mary, like why the church honored her so much. And so that was the biggest stumbling block with me coming into the church, and I just could not get it. And then my sponsor and RCI director, Jared, he gave me a small apologetics book on the Blessed Virgin Mary, and that really opened my eyes and really changed my mind, because then it was great because it showed me where she was in Scripture by seeing the Bible typologically, seeing the Old Testament people and events as prefigurations of their New Testament fulfillments. So once I saw Mary as the new Eve, well, that explained the Immaculate Conception. And once I saw her as the new Ark of the Covenant, that explained why we would honor her so much. And then, of course, she's the new Queen Mother. So I then understood why we would pray to her and ask her intercession. And then, of course, I knew already that Catholics didn't worship Mary, but just venerated her highly. And so it's funny now because, you know, once I got past that, I was 100% in to becoming Catholic. And that was about January 2015 when I decided I'm full in. I actually got confirmed on my birthday, April 4th of 2015. So that was my 27th birthday. Got confirmed at Easter Vigil that year. Received the Eucharist for the first time. So that was awesome. And it wasn't long after where I started teaching about the Blessed Virgin Mary to RCIA because I learned so much, and I now have a deep devotion to her. which is so enjoyable, and it's just brought me closer to Christ, which is the whole point anyway.
Yeah. There was something that really struck me as profound there's a lot of profundity, in your journey. But when I was listening to your podcast, could you share with us the Lord of the Rings connection in terms of, it's like if I want to have fellowship with Jesus, why don't Jesus just beam me up, so I could be with him in eternity instead of go through all this rigmarole, Yeah. And I think you said it was your RCIA director of the Lord of the Rings. Yeah, could you share that with us?
Well, it was actually about 2 years ago, I went on an 8-day silent retreat, and I'd never been on any silent retreat ever. And so 8 days I was kind of scared going into it, like, man, this is going to be tough. Yeah. But I love the Lord of the Rings, and, it was cool because my RCI director, he also loves the Lord of the Rings. And that was a huge connection point. But this happened years later, obviously, in 2018. Yeah. But I was on the silent retreat, and I had often, like I mentioned before, since third grade, I had wanted to die and be with Christ. Like I want to be in heaven. Like to me to die is gain. And so I have that, just in me. And so I was just wrestling with God during the silent retreat. Like, Lord, why don't you just take me now? Like, seriously, I'm ready. Like, please, let's get to the end of the story here. And he just reminded me, like, hey, Eric, you know how you just hate it when people suggest that the Eagles and Lord of the Rings could have just taken Frodo and Sam from the Shire and dumped them off at Mount Doom, and they could have thrown the ring into the fiery pit, like in 2 seconds, it would have all been done. I was like, yeah, I hate that because there's no story, there's no journey, there's no friendship formed. He's like, exactly. And so that was on like day 1 or 2 of the silent retreat. But on day 7 of the retreat, he reminded me of another scene in Lord of the Rings where, and once again, spoiler alert here of Lord of the Rings, but hopefully everyone here has seen it. But so Frodo and Sam, they're like the best of friends, and they had just finished their mission, and they are in Gondor recovering. And Frodo wakes up, and he's reunited with all his friends. He's reunited with Gandalf. He sees Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli. They all are laughing and having so much joy. And then Sam walks in, his best friend. And Sam and Frodo just look at each other with this look of just intense intimacy that just says to each other, I know you. I've suffered with you. I went on the adventure with you. We did this whole story together. And that's when the Lord was like, Eric, you see, that's what you actually want. You don't just want to go to heaven. You want to, when you're in heaven, you want to have that look of intimacy in your eyes with me. That look of intimacy that says we did life together, we journeyed together, we suffered together, we had joys together, and that can only be forged through the journey of faith on earth, and it can't be skipped over. You can't just like get the Eagle shuttle to Mount Doom. You got to go through the journey. And so it pinpointed me like, yes, that's what I actually want. It's not just to go to heaven. It's that when I'm in heaven, I have this deep, deep intimacy with Christ. And that really transformed my whole life. I mean, that shifted my whole paradigm on.
Yeah.
And so now I'm grateful that I'm still here. And each day now I ask the Lord, all right, Lord, like, let's deepen our friendship today. Let's do that.
Yeah. I love that because it's so common for people to think picking up your cross daily and following Christ, that's what separates you from Christ, when actually it's what unites you even closer to him.
Yeah. Exactly.
Great stuff. So, you mentioned that you were a part, at least for some time, with the megachurch movement. How would you, if you were to meet somebody, you probably already still have friends who was in the megachurch, how would you introduce them to the historic faith? Is there anything that you feel is most effective? Or?
Yeah, I think starting at that common point of personal relationship with Christ, and that's a really important thing. It is hard. Like, most of my friends and family are still Protestant, but not a lot of them go to that same sort of mega church. A lot of them go to that charismatic church that I was talking about. And so with them, it's a little different, but with all of them, it really is starting at that common foundation of personal relationship with Christ. And so here's the thing is like, okay, I used to think, and this is how a lot of them still think, is that veneration of Mary and the saints, or the liturgy, like the pattern, the rhythm, and all of that is just a distraction from Christ. And so what I would share with them is just like, hey, I used to think the same thing, but here's what I found, that actually all of those things and the rhythm of the liturgy and the angels, the saints, and the Blessed Virgin, all of it is actually putting me in a deeper, intimate relationship with Christ. And to encounter Jesus in the Eucharist, to have that union where he gives me his whole self and I give my whole self to him, that exchange of intimate love is something it's so profound. So it doesn't get less about Jesus, or it doesn't get distracted. It actually just becomes more intense. And so if you're ready to jump into a more intense relationship with Christ, check this out. So that's how I would talk about it.
Yeah, that's a tough nut to crack in some ways, because, like you said, it's a very different kind of paradigm of looking at things. And another huge thing that causes a lot of confusion for people is they think that the sacraments, once you learn about sacraments, they think that they are equivalent to works of the law in the Old Testament. And so I quickly want to frame it for them of like, no, these aren't works of the law. These are means of grace. And so when we talk about like grace, we talk about these are just the ways that God has appointed us to encounter him, to have that relationship with him. And so these aren't works of the law. These are means of grace. And so, yes, we can agree on that emphasis of grace. And praise be to God that he actually gives us a concrete way to encounter him. And I think that is very useful in these conversations as well. Yeah, very good. Well, you left a couple of loose threads in your journey. I'm just curious, your friend who was Anglican that was showing you the early church fathers, is he still Anglican?
No, so a year after I became Catholic, he became Catholic, and I was his sponsor. So,
oh wow, awesome! Thanks be to God.
Yeah, that was great. And he only delayed it. Well, he delayed it for two reasons. One, some personal things were happening in his life, but also he was still hung up on the papacy. And so I gave him a book about the early papacy by Adrian Fortescue that I actually hadn't read. I was just desperate to give him something, so I just found it online, gave it to him, and he loved it. And it quoted a lot of the early fathers, and he's like, "All right, I'm enough in to be like I'm all in." So because he was at that point he was between Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, and Roman Catholic, and that kind of pushed him over to the Catholic edge there, and so that was cool. And then we actually both went on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land right after he was confirmed. So his second Mass ever was in the Holy Land, which was pretty awesome.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. Well, boy, I can't believe our time has flown. Eric, where can people go to access your podcast?
Yes, well, you should be able to find my podcast, hopefully wherever podcasts are found. So just type in Polycarp's Paradigm. If you have trouble, you can go to my website, polycarpsparadigm.com, and hit the subscribe button there. So that's the main way, is polycarpsparadigm.com.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been a lot of fun.
All right, thanks, Gary.
All right, that's Eric Robinson, and the site is Polycarp's Paradigm. Check it out, folks. Lots of great material, and as you can tell, Eric is fired up for the faith, so I expect more great things to come. And coming up next, talk about great things to come, we have the Terry and Jesse Show, high-impact Catholic talk coming at you. It's time for me to shut down the Midwest Command Center here and turn up the Dojo lights. Thank you so much for tuning in. God bless. We'll talk again soon.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church. So I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.